The chandeliers of Almac's assembly rooms dripped with light that night, thousands of trembling reflections cast across mirrors, gowns, and the proud faces of London's most unforgiving audience. Beneath their golden brilliance, Lady Amelia Harrow, Duchess of Windermere, sat alone upon a velvet settee near the marble column. Around her, laughter swelled and receded like tides, each ripple of amusement a quiet reminder that she was no longer the woman the ton adored. Once, men had tripped over their compliments to secure her attention. Now they passed her as if she were a portrait of faded color, respected, yes, but no longer worth a glance. The Duchess's gown shimmered softly in pale satin trimmed with green silk, its square neckline modest yet betraying the generous curve of her form. Her figure, once described as lush as the English countryside, was now whispered about as excessive, indulgent. She kept her gloved hands folded upon her lap, the fingers still trembling slightly from the memory of a minuet she had not been invited to join. A waltz began, graceful, languid, and she turned her head toward the floor, where slender girls spun like petals caught in the wind. Their laughter sparkled cruelly, rehearsed to perfection. "Such a shame," murmured Lady Honoria Penworth behind her fan. She was quite the rage before Windermere's death, was she not? "Before grief and cake took her charms, yes," replied another voice. They giggled, the kind of laughter meant to wound from behind silk and civility. Amelia heard every syllable. Her cheeks burned, though her smile remained. To the world, she was still wealth and lineage, the Duchess with the great dowry, the widow of a man whose name echoed through Parliament, but within her heart she was something smaller, a ghost among the living, haunting a ballroom she once ruled. Her late husband's passing had not freed her. It had merely made her visible in the cruelest way, alone and therefore vulnerable to judgment. She rose slightly as a gentleman approached, a viscount known for his eagerness to charm any breathing creature. But at the sight of her, he hesitated, stammered a greeting meant for someone else and veered away. It was the smallest humiliation, yet it cut with surgical precision. Amelia lowered herself again, clutching her fan, its ivory ribs biting against her palm. The narrator's voice, if one had been there to speak, might have said, "Society worshipped youth as virtue and treated grief as weakness." And so, the Duchess of Windermere became a quiet caution. What beauty becomes when time refuses to flatter it. The orchestra swelled. The air shimmered with perfume and candle smoke. Across the ballroom, laughter collided with the metallic chime of glassware, and Amelia felt the weight of her solitude thicken into a tangible thing. She wished for invisibility, or courage, but neither came easily in satin shoes. Her mind drifted toward her carriage, waiting beyond the frost-glazed windows. She imagined the comfort of its shadows, the privacy of regret. Yet even as she gathered her courage to leave, a hush fell over the crowd, a silence rare enough to demand attention. The door at the far end of the hall had opened, and through it stepped a man whose presence cut cleanly through the murmur of gossip. The Duke of Wexmoor had returned. He was older than most remembered, his hair silvered not by powder but by campaigns in Spain. He leaned upon a silver-headed cane, though the posture was not of frailty but discipline, a soldier's economy of movement. The scar upon his temple was faint yet undeniable, like the echo of something that refused to fade. His gaze swept the room, cool and assessing, and every whisper bent toward his direction. Amelia had met him once years ago, when her husband was alive and her laughter still came easily. Then he had been distant, reserved, his eyes the color of storm glass. Now, as he crossed the floor, the orchestra faltered ever so slightly, the violins tripping over their bowstrings. "Good heavens," whispered a matron. "He's heading toward her." He was indeed. Step by deliberate step, he approached Amelia's corner, his boots silent upon the marble. The ton's attention clung to him like static. For a heartbeat, she thought he must have mistaken her for someone else. Then his shadow fell over her, cool and tall, and she dared to lift her eyes. "Your Grace," she murmured, her voice nearly lost beneath the music. "Your Grace," he returned, inclining his head. His tone carried the faint amusement of a man who had survived cannon fire and now found society's cruelty almost quaint. "I fear you'll find me poor company," she said, forcing a smile. "Then we shall be poor together," he replied softly. He extended his gloved hand. "The next waltz, if you would honor me." A breath caught in her throat. She looked beyond him, every face now turned toward them, every whisper sharpening like glass. The notion was impossible. He, a decorated hero still courted by the ton's brightest names, could not mean it. Yet his hand remained, patient and unflinching. I would not wish to invite ridicule," she whispered. "Then let them think you're mine tonight," he said, low enough for her alone. His voice was not flirtation, it was command disguised as kindness. Let the cruel find something new to speak of. The words struck her like music, both dangerous and redemptive. She hesitated only a moment more before placing her hand in his. His grip was firm, grounding, as though pulling her from some quiet abyss. A collective gasp fluttered across the ballroom as he led her to the center of the floor. The musicians faltered once more, then began anew, slower this time, almost reverent. As they turned in rhythm, her pulse kept time with the violins. For the first time in months she felt seen, not as a spectacle of pity, but as a woman still capable of grace. Wexmoor moved with practiced elegance, his limp barely noticeable. He kept his gaze upon her, not once glancing toward the gawking spectators. Under the soft blaze of candlelight she saw gentleness beneath his battle-worn face, a quiet defiance against the world's unkind measure of worth. "You should not have done this," she whispered as they turned. "Done what, your grace?" "Rescued me." He smiled faintly. "I do not rescue those who are standing." Her lips parted to reply, but the music carried them onward. Around them the ton's murmur changed tone, confusion, envy, disbelief. For a brief, glittering moment, scandal and admiration became indistinguishable. When the final chord faded, he did not release her hand. Together they bowed, their silence louder than the applause that reluctantly followed. As they returned to her seat, he leaned close enough that only she could hear. "Do not leave early," he murmured. "Not tonight." Then he turned and vanished into the crowd, leaving her standing amidst the fragments of her composure. She sat once more breathless, the scent of his glove lingering faintly upon hers. The room spun with whispers, some cruel, others curious. Yet beneath their judgment, something flickered alive within her, a pulse of defiance, a dangerous hope. Outside, snow began to fall, each flake glinting like the chandelier's reflection. And in that fragile shimmer, the Duchess of Wexmoor realized, perhaps for the first time, that humiliation and deliverance could arrive in the same evening, bound together by the hand of a man who saw what others refused to see. The violins began again. Somewhere across the hall, the Duke's gaze found hers through the crowd, steady, unreadable. And for reasons she could not name, Amelia smiled. The following morning's edition of the Morning Gazette fluttered across London's breakfast tables like a scandal wrapped in lace. The war hero waltzes with the Dowager Duchess, it proclaimed in ink as dark as sin. Caricaturists were already sketching them. His silver head bowed gallantly, her rounded form painted with cruel exaggeration. By noon, every salon from Mayfair to Grosvenor Square buzzed with the same sentence. He danced with her. Amelia did not read the paper herself, though her maid did, pale-faced and trembling. The Duchess merely smiled as though she had expected the blow. She had endured harsher words, whispered over her shoulder in drawing-rooms scented with envy. But this time the words had teeth, and they carried his name as well as hers. That knowledge unsettled her. It was one thing to be pitied, another to bring ruin upon a man who had already survived war. By evening, the ton's fascination had matured into outrage. Yet as twilight painted London in blue, the Duke of Wexmoor's carriage rolled unhurriedly into the drive of the Wexmoor townhouse. Servants stumbled to attention, lamps were lit, windows brightened. Amelia, standing at the window in her pale muslin gown, felt her pulse stir like the first note of a forgotten song. When he entered, he carried no bouquet, no apology, only the quiet composure of a man unbothered by the gossip he had ignited. "You've caused an uproar," she murmured, meeting him halfway across the grand hall. "Then let us dance again," he replied dryly. "Nothing quiets a rumor like consistency." Her laugh, soft, uncertain, broke something fragile within the room's silence. He gestured toward the drawing room and she followed, her steps cautious upon the Persian carpet. There, before the fire, he offered no more words than necessary. His eyes caught hers with a gentleness rare among men who had seen death. "I have come to return a token," he said, drawing from his coat a small box. Within lay an emerald brooch, oval, intricate, old as devotion itself. "It belonged to my mother," he said. "She wore it the night my father returned from India. She said love, if true, must always be worn where the heart beats loudest." Amelia drew back slightly. "You mistake me for a woman who deserves such poetry." "I mistake nothing," he said, voice steady. "Wear it until the season ends, or until gossip forgets us both." The air thickened between them, that exquisite quiet where neither dared admit what trembled beneath courtesy. She touched the brooch as though it might vanish. "You risk your reputation, your grace." He smiled faintly. "Madam, I left my reputation on the field at Salamanca." Outside, hoofs clattered past on the frozen street. The world continued its cruel gossip, but within the walls of the Windmere home, time seemed suspended. She pinned the brooch to her gown and felt, absurdly, that the weight steadied her. The following week unfolded as a study in defiance. Wherever Amelia appeared, Wexmoor was near. At the opera, he stood beside her box. At the charity auction, he bid upon her chosen painting with a sum that silenced whispers. Their alliance was not affectionate by any spoken word. It was something stranger, purer. Two souls wounded by different wars, meeting in the quiet rebellion of shared dignity. Yet London's appetite for scandal was bottomless. The younger debutantes began to mimic Amelia's gowns, parodying her curves and laughter. A satire appeared on the Strand, a miniature stage performance where an actress stuffed her bodice and parodied the Duchess's waltz. The laughter of strangers rang through the cold air as Amelia's carriage passed the theater. She turned her face away, tears burning but unshed. Wexmoor, beside her, saw it all. He said nothing at first, only removed his glove and placed his bare hand over hers. The contact was shocking in its intimacy. "Do you wish me to silence them?" he asked quietly. "How does one silence an entire city?" she whispered. "One chooses not to hear it," he replied. "The rest follows." They sat in silence as snow drifted past the lanterns. His hand remained unmoving until her trembling eased. The next ball was a deliberate act of defiance. Rumors claimed she would not dare appear again, so she arrived precisely at 10, luminous in white silk and emeralds. Gasps rippled through the hall. And then came Wexmoor, late as though to make them wait for spectacle. He crossed the room without hesitation, bowed low before her, and extended his hand once more. "Are we to do this again?" she murmured. "Until they forget why they ever stared." The waltz began. Around them, society watched as scandal turned into art. His hand rested at her back, guiding her through each turn with the assurance of command. Their movements, though measured, carried something fierce beneath their grace, a quiet rage against the rules that confined them. Her laughter returned, uncertain at first, then bright and real. When the final note faded, the room erupted not in applause but in astonished silence. Even the cruelest tongues hesitated, as if shamed by their own malice. Later, in the carriage home, Amelia sat gazing at her reflection in the frost-clouded glass. "You've made me the subject of every whisper in London," she said softly. He smiled, watching the city drift by. Whispers fade. Courage lingers. "Do you mean to be my champion, then?" "Not your champion," he said, turning to her. "Your witness." She met his eyes, steady, unyielding, and in that gaze she found something she had not felt in years: safety. They spoke little else, the silence between them thick with words neither dared confess. When the carriage halted before her townhouse, he lingered at the threshold, his hand resting briefly upon hers. "I will call again," he said simply. "For society's amusement?" she teased, though her voice trembled. "For my own," he answered, and was gone. That night, Amelia lay awake, the emerald brooch glinting faintly upon her dresser. Its light reminded her of his eyes, calm, impenetrable, refusing to yield to ridicule. Yet beneath that memory lay something darker: fear. The tongue could forgive flirtation, even scandal, but affection, genuine, dangerous affection, was another matter entirely. She rose and crossed to the window. Outside, the snow had begun again, blanketing the cobblestones. Somewhere beyond the city's glitter, a man she barely knew had chosen to tether his name to hers, not for vanity, but for something resembling decency, perhaps even tenderness. She wondered if kindness ever came without cost in their world. A figure stirred in the street below, her footman returning from a message. He handed a letter to the butler, who knocked moments later upon her door. The seal bore the Duke's crest. Inside, a single line: "They will talk until something louder silences them. Tomorrow I have a plan." Her pulse quickened. For the first time in years, anticipation replaced dread. She pressed the note to her chest, unaware that across London, the caricaturists sharpened their quills anew. The city was hungry for another scandal, and the Duke of Wexmoor intended to feed it, but on his own terms. The morning light in the Duke's townhouse fell like the hush after a confession, pale, uncertain, edged with frost. Outside, the city churned with gossip. Inside, the world held its breath. Amelia entered the drawing room wearing grey silk and composure. The invitation he had sent the previous night, simple, sealed with his crest, had contained only 6 words: "Come sit for a portrait if you dare." She had accepted, though she could not have explained why. Curiosity, perhaps. Or pride. Or that quiet longing to be seen without cruelty. The Duke stood near the hearth, his figure stark against the morning's pallor. The painter, a young man from Florence with ink-stained cuffs, waited by the easel. He bowed stiffly, more accustomed to landscapes than scandal. "I had no notion you fancied yourself an art patron," Amelia said lightly, unpinning her cloak. "I do not," Wexmoor replied. "But I thought the world might look at you through a gentler frame if not through its own eyes." The remark struck her unexpectedly. "Then this portrait is to be rehabilitation?" "No," he said, his gaze steady. "A correction." He motioned for her to sit beside the window. Sunlight spilled across her shoulder, gilding the edge of her hair. The painter began, his brush whispering over canvas. Yet it was the Duke's attention that unnerved her, the way he lingered by the mantel, not watching the artist but her. "Why choose me?" she asked after a time, her tone half jest, half plea. His answer came quietly. "Because you are the only honest face in London." Her heart stumbled. She forced a small laugh. "Honesty, your grace, is rarely fashionable. Nor is decency," he said, "but it remains necessary." They fell into silence again, broken only by the brush's rhythm and the faint crackle of fire. The stillness between them grew intimate, like a conversation unspoken yet understood. Through the painter's soft murmurs, Amelia could feel Wexmoor's eyes tracing her, the curve of her cheek, the weary dignity in her posture. It was not the scrutiny of desire, but recognition. Hours slipped by. When the painter excused himself to fetch fresh pigment, Wexmoor crossed the room. "Hold still," he murmured, adjusting the fall of her shawl. His gloved hand brushed the side of her neck, and the contact, so slight, so careful, was enough to send a shiver through her. "You tremble," he observed. "I am cold," she lied. "Then let me confess something that may warm you," he said, stepping back. "I asked for this portrait not for them, but for myself." The words hung between them, fragile as glass. She turned toward him slowly, searching his face for mockery and finding none. "You, a man of sense, would want my likeness upon your wall?" "I have walls enough lined with medals," he said softly. "They speak of endurance, not meaning. I wished for something worth remembering." The confession struck her deeper than flattery. Yet before she could answer, the painter returned, humming, oblivious to the quiet upheaval that had passed. When the sitting ended, the Duke offered her tea. They lingered by the fire, both unwilling to let the morning collapse into the ordinary. "Does battle ever leave a man whole?" she asked. He considered before answering. "No. War does not end, it only changes its scenery. One returns home to find the cannons replaced by conversation, the wounds by gossip. The brave die once, the polite die daily." She looked at him, startled by the bitterness. "And yet you endure." He smiled faintly. "Endurance is not victory, Duchess. It is habit." Her voice softened. "Then you and I share that affliction." Their eyes met, two people who had learned survival in different wars. For the first time, Amelia felt the air between them shift from courtesy to something tender, precarious. She wanted to thank him, but gratitude felt too small a word. Then a knock interrupted. The butler entered, flustered, holding a folded note. "Forgive me, your grace, it is for Mr. Bellini, the painter." The young man broke the seal and paled. "Signor," he murmured, bowing quickly to both. "A misunderstanding. A fellow from the London Courier commissioned a copy of the portrait for publication. He thought permission granted." "What?" Amelia rose, color flooding her face. "A copy?" Wexmoor's voice was low, dangerous. "Who gave leave for this?" "No one, I swear it," he said. But the Duke did not wait for excuses. He strode to the easel, seized the unfinished canvas, and with one violent motion ripped it from its frame. The painter gasped as the Duke hurled it into the fire. The flames devoured the image greedily, silk, pigment, and shame curling into smoke. "Your art has served its purpose," Wexmoor said curtly. "You may go." When the door closed, silence filled the room again. The fire hissed softly, consuming the last fragments of her face. Amelia stared at the ashes. "You should not have done that." "I should have done it sooner," he said. "Let them pay for gossip, not for your dignity. It was only a painting." "No," he said. "It was a permission. One they will never have again." Something broke within her restraint. "You think to defend me as though I were helpless," she whispered. "But do you not see? They mock me precisely because I endure. I remain visible, and that offends them." He looked at her with something close to awe. "Then let them be offended." She laughed through her tears. You are impossible. So I have been told, he murmured. The tension softened. He stepped closer, and this time she did not move away. Forgive me, he said quietly. I have spent too many years believing I could command decency by force. War teaches the wrong lessons. Her gaze lifted to meet his. And what has peace taught you? That kindness, he said, is a battle fought in silence. The firelight drew amber upon their faces. For a long moment neither spoke. His hand brushed against hers, tentative, seeking. Her fingers closed over his before reason could intervene. The gesture was small, but its meaning vast. A wordless confession shared between two souls long denied permission to feel. They stood thus until the clock chimed noon. Reality crept back with its familiar cruelty. She withdrew her hand first. You've made me reckless, she said softly. Good, he replied. The world could use more of your courage. She smiled faintly. And what will you do now that you've burned your proof of gallantry? Find another reason to be near you, he said too quickly. Then, as if realizing his own honesty, he turned away. Outside, church bells tolled across the city, carrying news of neither scandal nor salvation. Only the sound of ordinary life. A servant entered hesitantly, bowing low. Your Graces, he said, a messenger just arrived from Lord Pemberton's estate. It concerns the Gazette. Wexmoor's expression darkened. What of it? The servant extended a small folded sheet. They say tomorrow's edition will publish a sketch of you both. The painter's apprentice sold his memory for coin. Amelia's breath caught. Wexmoor took the paper, crushing it in his fist. Then they mean to make you their entertainment. Us, she corrected softly. They mean to make us. He met her gaze, and something unspoken passed between them. Defiance, perhaps, or the first shape of love disguised as resolve. Then let us decide what story they will tell, he said quietly. Her voice barely above a whisper. And what if it destroys us both? His answer came like a vow. Then at least it will be of our choosing. The fire cracked, casting shadows over the ruined portrait. The embers pulsed like heartbeats in the gloom, steady and unashamed. And for the first time, Amelia felt that destruction might not be the end, but the beginning of something far more dangerous. Truth. The dawn rose pale and uncertain over the Thames, its mists curling like unspoken words along the riverbank. The frost was beginning to thaw, turning the cobblestones slick and luminous beneath the soft glow of gas lamps. Amelia descended from her carriage with a tremor of hesitation, her gloved hand steadying against the doorframe. The letter in her pocket, Wexmoor's second in as many days, had been maddeningly brief. Tomorrow by the river. Come before the city wakes. She had not slept. Rumor now galloped faster than carriages, her name entwined with his in every parlor. Some whispered of secret engagements, others of an affair fit for scandal. Yet it was not fear that brought her to the river, it was the ache of unfinished words, the need to understand what, precisely, he meant to do with her heart and reputation both. The Duke stood near the embankment, silhouetted against the gray morning. He wore no greatcoat despite the chill, his cane resting by a post, his breath visible in small white clouds. Around them the city stirred, a milkman's cart creaked over the stones, a bell tolled faintly from St. Paul's. When he turned, she caught the faintest trace of weariness in his face, the mark of a man who had fought one battle too many. I half expected you wouldn't come, he said. Curiosity has always been my ruin, she replied, her voice brittle but brave. He smiled faintly. Then allow me to satisfy it. She crossed the last few paces toward him, her skirts brushing against frost. You chose a curious setting for conversation, Your Grace. Shall we scandalize the swans next? Better them than the ton, he said. They at least know grace when they see it. The jest was soft, but his tone was not. There was something urgent in his bearing, something that unsettled her. She followed his gaze to the slow-moving water, silvered by the first touch of sun. You look as though you've come to deliver a sentence, she murmured. Perhaps I have. He turned fully to face her, eyes fierce despite their gentleness. They mean to ruin you, Amelia. The sketch will be published today. I could not stop it, but I can give them a truth so grand they'll choke upon it. Her heart thudded. You intend to confess, to confirm what they say? He nodded once. Yes, that you are my intended. That our bond was forged not in scandal but in promise. She stared at him, disbelief and dread twisting together. You would make me a duchess twice over? For pity's sake. For no sake but my own, he said. I am too old for vanity and too honest for lies. I love you, Amelia. The words fell between them like a cannon's silence, sudden, irreversible. Her breath hitched, the world narrowing to the frost, the river, and the man before her. "You cannot," she whispered. "You cannot say such things and mean them. I mean every syllable." He stepped closer, voice low and steady. "Do you not see what you've done? I returned from war convinced I would feel nothing again. And then you, mocked, magnificent, unbowed, sat beneath chandeliers and refused to disappear. I found life again in that defiance." She turned away, trembling. "Love cannot erase gossip." "No," he agreed. "But it can make it irrelevant." The wind stirred her veil, brushing it against his sleeve. "And if I refuse?" she asked softly. "If I choose to remain unclaimed? Then I will still stand beside you," he said. "Let them call me mad. Let them call me yours. I will bear either name gladly." His voice cracked on that last word, and the sound undid her. All the pride she had guarded, the careful walls built of dignity and wit, cracked under the weight of his sincerity. She turned back, her eyes wet though she smiled. "You are a foolish man." "Frequently," he said. "Then I must be worse," she breathed, "for I believe you." They stood close enough now that her breath mingled with his. The river whispered below, carrying away every word they could not say aloud. He reached into his coat and drew forth a single flower encased in a thin shell of ice, a white rose, frozen yet perfect. "It was the last in my garden," he said. "I thought it might remind you that beauty and endurance are not opposites." She took it carefully, the chill stinging her palm. The gesture was absurdly tender, heartbreakingly human. "You think me strong," she said, "but I am only tired." "Then rest with me," he answered. "Let the world exhaust itself for once." She laughed softly, the sound breaking through the morning stillness. "If only it were that simple." "It can be," he said, and reached for her hand. His touch was light, reverent, as though she were made of something fragile and holy. "Do not mistake my defiance for gallantry. I am no savior, Amelia. I only wish to live honestly, and I cannot do so without you." For a long moment she could not speak. The world around them seemed suspended, the ripple of water, the cry of distant gulls, the faint tolling of the hour. Then very quietly she said, "You have already saved me, though neither of us wished it." He bowed his head, his thumb brushing the back of her hand. "Then let this salvation cost us both. I will go to the Gazette before noon. They will print what I tell them, that our engagement has been long planned, our affection long hidden for propriety's sake. They will not believe it, but they will have no proof to the contrary. And when they demand a wedding?" His smile was faint, tired, hopeful. "Then I shall have the honor of asking properly." Her heart fluttered painfully. She looked toward the pale horizon, the city's silhouette blurred in mist. "You risk everything for a woman society has already condemned. I have faced musket fire for less worthy causes." She met his eyes, those gray depths that held war, loss, and now a strange, impossible peace. "Then God forgive me," she said softly, "for letting you." The faintest smile touched his lips. "I'd rather you thanked me later." The sun broke through the fog then, scattering gold across the river. The light caught the ice in her hand, turning the rose into a prism of brilliance. Without thinking, she lifted it toward him, and he bent, brushing his lips against her chilled fingers. The world seemed to still in that instant. The Duke and the Duchess, two exiles from society's mercy, standing together by the water's edge like figures in a painting no one would dare hang. "Let them think what they will," she whispered. He looked up, eyes glinting with something both fierce and tender. "They already do," he said. "Now let us give them reason." Their lips met, not with the hunger of youth, but with the quiet reverence of two souls who had suffered long enough to know the value of gentleness. It was not a kiss for witnesses but for memory, meant to exist even when the world denied it. When they parted, the wind carried a murmur of footsteps behind them. A carriage door creaked. Amelia turned and froze. At the edge of the street, two men stood beside a black coach bearing the royal crest of the Prince Regent. One of them lifted a spyglass, observing them with clinical curiosity. The Duke's jaw tightened. "It seems," he said quietly, "our audience has expanded." Her fingers tightened around the frozen rose, the ice beginning to crack. "Then the war begins?" she whispered. He offered his arm, calm and defiant as the river itself. "So be it." The ballroom blazed with light once more, though the warmth it offered was as false as the pearls upon the ladies' throats. 1,000 candles trembled in their mirrored sconces, throwing gold across gowns and diamonds, as if determined to conceal the bitterness that hummed beneath the music. It was a night orchestrated not for celebration but curiosity. London's elite gathered to witness the end of a scandal. Would the Duchess of Wexmoor dare appear again? Would the disgraced Duke of Wexmoor dare accompany her? The orchestra tuned their violins like gossip sharpening its tongue. A hush spread through the assembly as the grand doors opened. Amelia stood framed within them, every inch of her gown a quiet act of defiance. Emerald silk shimmered against her pale skin. The brooch he had given her gleamed near her heart, where whispers could not reach. For a heartbeat, silence reigned, then the murmur began, soft as moths against flame. She's returned. With that brooch no less. How brazen. She ignored them all. Each step she took across the floor felt heavier than the last, as though she carried the weight of every cruel word she had ever endured. But her chin did not waver, nor her eyes. Somewhere beyond the crowd, the Duke was waiting. She could feel his absence like an ache. He had not written since their meeting by the river. She feared that the regent's men had silenced him, or worse, that he had chosen silence himself. Then, just as she reached the center of the room, a new sound rose above the murmuring, the uneven rhythm of a cane striking marble. Heads turned. The crowd parted slowly, revealing him. Wexmoor, paler than she remembered, leaning heavily on his cane, yet radiating that same unyielding gravity. A faint line of bandage was visible beneath his collar. The whispers sharpened into astonishment. He was injured? Refused the regent's summons, they say. Surely he will not dance. But he did. He crossed the floor, each step deliberate as though defying pain itself. When he reached her, he bowed, not perfunctorily but deeply, reverently, as though she were the only truth in a room of deceit. The murmur of violins faltered, then quieted entirely. "Forgive my delay," he murmured, his voice roughened by exhaustion and something deeper. "I thought it fitting that I arrive late so they might learn patience." "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, tears glinting unshed. "Then we are both precisely where we should not be," he replied. "May I?" His hand extended, steady, unafraid. She hesitated only a moment before placing hers within it. The orchestra, sensing command, began a waltz unlike any it had played before, slow, solemn, breathtaking. They moved together through the golden air, her skirts trailing like liquid light, his steps measured and sure despite the limp. Every turn silenced another whisper, every motion reclaimed a fragment of her stolen dignity. The onlookers could not decide whether to scorn or admire them. "This is madness," someone hissed. "It is devotion," another whispered, almost reverently. Amelia's pulse throbbed at her throat. "They will never forgive this," she said softly. "Then let us give them something unforgettable." He spun her beneath the chandeliers, and for a moment she was not the widow mocked by drawing rooms, nor he the relic of war, but two souls who had survived the world's cruelty and found each other in its ruins. His eyes never left hers, even as applause hesitated, grew, then swelled like a tide that could not be resisted. When the music ended, he did not release her hand. Instead, he turned toward the assembled crowd. "My lords and ladies," he began, his voice carrying through the chamber like a command on the battlefield, "I thank you for your attention. It seems you have come expecting scandal. Allow me to offer instead a promise." A ripple of unease passed through the crowd. Amelia's breath caught. "I have asked the Duchess of Wexmoor for her hand," he continued, his tone neither boast nor plea but declaration. "And she has granted me the honor of her acceptance." The room erupted, gasps, protests, whispers colliding like storms. "Impossible. Improper. He's ruined himself." But Amelia, still within his grasp, met his gaze steadily. "You did not ask me," she murmured beneath the uproar. He smiled faintly. "I did not need to. You already said yes by coming here." Her lips trembled, torn between laughter and tears. Around them, society quivered on the edge of outrage, waiting for either shame or surrender. Instead, Amelia lifted her chin and curtsied deeply. The emerald at her heart caught the light like a spark. "Then let the ton remember this night," she said clearly, her voice ringing out. "For once, their whispers have made something worth speaking of." Applause followed, not from all but from enough. A few brave souls clapped hesitantly, others, moved despite themselves, joined in. The rhythm swelled until even the musicians could not resist adding a triumphant chord. The scandal had become spectacle, the spectacle legend. The Duke bowed, his strength finally faltering. She caught his arm, steadying him. "You should sit," she whispered. "I will," he said faintly, "when you promise not to vanish again." "I shall never again hide," she replied and meant it. They withdrew together to the terrace, where cold air bit against the heat of the ballroom. Snow drifted lazily through the gaslight, settling upon his shoulders like forgiveness. The Thames shimmered far below, carrying the reflection of the very chandeliers that had once humiliated her. He sank onto a bench, wincing as the weight came upon his injured leg. "They'll speak of this for decades," he murmured. "Perhaps centuries if they are particularly dull." She laughed through her tears, sitting beside him. "You've sacrificed every ounce of reputation for my sake." "I have traded reputation," he corrected gently, "for truth, and I find it a better companion." Her hand found his. "And what shall we do now, my Duke?" "Live," he said simply. "Quietly if they permit it, loudly if they do not." Silence settled between them, not empty but full, the kind of silence that means peace. She rested her head against his shoulder. The sound of music carried faintly through the windows, another waltz beginning inside. "I used to think love belonged only to the young," she said softly. He smiled. "It belongs to the brave." Their breath mingled in the cold, and for the first time in years, Amelia felt her heart unclench. The river moved beyond the terrace like a ribbon of light, bearing away everything cruel and small. Behind them, the ballroom's laughter resumed, fainter now, almost human. The world would recover its cruelty soon enough. But tonight it had witnessed grace. Wexmoor pressed his lips to her temple. "You were magnificent," he murmured. "So were you," she said, though limping. "I am at my best when wounded," he said. "It reminds me I'm alive." She looked at him then, truly looked, and saw not the soldier nor the scandal, but the man who had taught her that dignity need not mean silence. "You gave me back my name," she whispered. He shook his head. "You reclaimed it yourself. I merely asked them to listen." The snow thickened, soft and relentless. In its hush, they seemed less like sinners defying the ton and more like two ordinary souls who had chosen each other over the world's applause. Far below, the river shimmered like a promise renewed. Inside, the orchestra struck the opening bars of another waltz. "Shall we?" he asked, rising carefully, offering his hand one last time. Her smile was radiant, unguarded. "Always." And so they danced again, not for the crowd, nor for forgiveness, but for memory. Each step was a quiet rebellion, each turn a benediction. When the music ended, they did not bow. They simply held each other beneath the falling snow, unbothered by witnesses, unburdened by the past. For the first time, the Duchess of Windermere and the Duke of Wexmoor belonged to no one but themselves. And as the candles dimmed and the violins sighed their final note, history forgot their scandal but remembered their grace.